It was past midnight when Taehyung found himself standing outside Jungkook's office, hesitant. Everyone had gone home hours ago, but the CEO's office lights were still on. Taehyung had finished his work for the day, but something had pulled him back, an unease he couldn't shake. Taking a deep breath, he knocked lightly before stepping inside. Jungkook was seated at his desk, sleeves rolled up, fingers pressed against his temple as he stared at a document. His usually sharp eyes were clouded with exhaustion, and for the first time Taehyung noticed just how tired he looked. "Sir," Taehyung said cautiously, "it's late, you should get some rest." Jungkook didn't look up. "Go home, Taehyung." Taehyung frowned. "Not until you do." That got Jungkook's attention. His eyes flicked up, sharp and assessing. "That's not your call." Taehyung made his gaze. "Underrated. Maybe not, but I don't think you should be pushing yourself like this." Jungkook exhaled sharply, leaning back in his chair. He studied Taehyung for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he let out a chuckle. "You are persistent," Jungkook murmured. Taehyung crossed his arms. "I have to be. You don't make things easy." For a second, something in Jungkook's gaze softened. But just as quickly, the walls came back up. He ran a hand through his hair. His voice quavered when he spoke again. "There are things you don't understand, Taehyung." Taehyung's breath caught. There it was, that flicker of something again, something deeper. "Then help me understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jungkook didn't answer right away. His jaw clenched, his eyes dark and unreadable. Taehyung thought he wouldn't respond at all. Then Jungkook sighed, pushing his chair back and standing up. He moved past Taehyung, walking toward the window. His silhouette was framed against the city lights, the weight of something unseen pressing against his shoulders. "I wasn't always like this," Jungkook said finally, his voice low. Taehyung's heart skipped a beat. "Like what?" he asked carefully. Jungkook turned to face him, and for the first time since they met, Taehyung saw something raw in his expression. Like someone who doesn't let people in, Taehyung felt his breath hitch. There was a truth hidden between those words, something unspoken, something Jungkook wasn't ready to say. But Taehyung didn't need the full story to understand one thing. Jungkook wasn't just a powerful CEO. He was a man who had built walls so high. He had forgotten what it felt like to let someone pass them. And for some reason, Taehyung wanted to be the one to change that. As Taehyung left the office that night, his mind was a mess. He had spent weeks convincing himself that his feelings for Jungkook were nothing more than admiration, that the pull he felt toward him was purely professional. But now he wasn't so sure. Because the way Jungkook had looked at him tonight, unguarded, vulnerable, just for a second, had made something shift inside Taehyung. And for the first time, he allowed himself to wonder, was he the only one feeling this, or was Jungkook fighting it too? The following days were different. Taehyung could feel it in the way Jungkook moved, in the way his gaze lingered just a second too long before he looked away. Jungkook didn't speak about that night, and neither did Taehyung, but something had changed between them. Something neither of them acknowledged, yet both of them felt. The air in Jungkook's office had grown heavier, charged with an unspoken tension that neither of them dared to address. Taehyung found himself hyper-aware of Jungkook's presence, the way his voice dipped lower when he spoke, the way his fingers absent-mindedly tapped against his desk when he was deep in thought. It was dangerous, and yet Taehyung couldn't seem to stop himself. One evening, Taehyung was in Jungkook's office, helping him go through a set of urgent documents. They had been working late for hours, the city outside dark and quiet. Jungkook was seated at his desk, sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened slightly. Taehyung stood beside him, leaning in as he pointed at a particular clause in the contract they were reviewing. "You will want to renegotiate this section," Taehyung murmured, his voice calm and professional. Jungkook hummed in agreement, his eyes fixed on the paper, but Taehyung barely noticed the document anymore, because suddenly the space between them felt too small. He was close, too close. Jungkook smelled like expensive cologne and something distinctly him, something warm and addictive. Taehyung's heartbeat shuddered and he swallowed hard. Then Jungkook turned his head and suddenly their faces were just inches apart. Taehyung's breath hissed. Neither of them moved. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock, but Taehyung could hear the rapid beat of his own heart, feel the heat of Jungkook's gaze as it flickered down, just for a second, to his lips. Taehyung's fingers curled slightly against the desk, gripping the edge as if it could ground him. Jungkook's throat bobbed as he swallowed, his expression unreadable. And then he pulled away. "Let's finish this," Jungkook said, his voice low but firm. Taehyung exhaled, nodding quickly as he stepped back, putting much needed space between them. But even as they returned to their work, pretending nothing had happened, Taehyung knew the truth. Something had happened, and no matter how much they tried to ignore it, they couldn't go back. That night, as Taehyung walked home, he couldn't stop replying the moment in his head, the way Jungkook had looked at him, the way just for a second it had seemed like he wanted to close the distance instead of pulling away. Taehyung had thought he was the only one struggling with this feeling, this impossible, dangerous attraction. But now he wasn't so sure, because if Jungkook had been fighting it too, then what would happen if one of them finally gave in? For days after that moment in the office, Jungkook and Taehyung pretended nothing had changed, but it had. Every glance felt heavier, every accidental touch lingered just a second too long. The air between them crackled with something unspoken, something they both knew was there but neither dared to acknowledge. And yet, despite their silence, it was there, a wildfire waiting to ignite.